coming from the U.S.? This delayed report, but, you know, hopefully we'll have it soon.
I'm expecting clear evidence of the role played by Mohammed bin Salman in the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. I'm expecting evidence proving that he ordered the killing, that he was fully aware of what was happening, and that he gave it its full endorsement.
So you're expecting that he was fully aware, that we'll learn he was fully aware, that he endorsed it? Are you expecting that this report will say he directed it?
Yes, that's what I am expecting, indeed.
Mm-hmm. And so you called in your investigation, in your report, you called for a follow-up investigation to determine individual liability of high-ranking Saudis, including the Crown Prince, this very thing that we're talking about in this report. And you heard this new CNN report about these airplanes. The airplanes that the Saudi hit team traveled on have been, they're from this company that was seized by MBS less than a year before the murder. What conclusions can you draw from that?
Look, in my report, I had already pointed that there was much circumstantial evidence pointing to the responsibility of the Crown Prince, including in terms of ordering the crime. That included the fact that the killing of Jamal Khashoggi was clearly well resourced by the state. It was premeditated. It was well organized. The Crown Prince right-hand man, Saud al-Qahtani, met the killing team before it left. We now have further evidence that the private jet that carried members of the team, some of whom traveled under diplomatic passport, by the way, one of the private jets had diplomatic clearance indeed, that those were directly owned by the Crown Prince. So all of that point clearly to not only the fact that it was a state killing, but that it was a killing orchestrated and planned at the highest level of the state by the Crown Prince.
In your report, you say that the international response really to all of this, condemnations, sanctions, that has been insufficient. Do you expect, I mean, have you seen that improve, and do you expect that that is going to change with this U.S. report coming out?
Yes, I mean, you know, justice for Jamal is not an outcome. It's going to be a journey, and we have been on that journey for more than 2 years, including CNN, including international media, because you guys have kept the issue on the spotlight. So justice continues. Tomorrow, hopefully, because it was not today, our journey for justice will mark a new benchmark, which is a very important element in identifying with much more evidence the individual liability, the individual responsibilities of the Crown Prince. It's part of it. The next step is, what do we do with this information once we have clear evidence that the Crown Prince was implicated? Clearly, the U.S. is going to be put under a lot of pressure to take actions on the basis of that evidence, and it cannot just be business as usual. In my opinion, what it means is that now we have sufficient evidence to target the Crown Prince for individualized sanction. Targeting his asset abroad, that's a minimum that can be done in the spirit of the Magnitsky sanctions. Secondly, I believe that the Crown Prince has proven that he is not fit for the diplomatic circles, for the diplomatic arena, and that he should be banished for a number of those international meetings. That, to me, are really minimum steps that can be taken to punish the individuals. And in addition, I do hope that the U.S. administration is going to seize on that opportunity, quotation mark, to say, now, let's put in place the international and the national instrument that are going to protect journalists the world over. Because you know, as well as I do, that there are dozens of journalists who every year are killed, who do not receive the same degree of attention as Jamal. We now have the opportunity to push for far more effective instruments to protect them and to prevent targeted killings.
Supreme Court has dealt two major blows to Donald Trump. The first one, of course, has to do with his tax returns, and the second has to do with challenges to, you got it, the 2020 general election, something that apparently he and his lawyers are still unwilling to let go. But let's start off with what we know so far about these decisions. Now, none of the three judges that Trump chose for the court, including Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, publicly objected to the subpoena seeking his guarded tax records or concluded that his reelection defeat was tainted. So again, these two cases, you have these three Supreme Court justices who are unwilling to do Trump's bidding for him. And honestly, I was even surprised by that. I really thought that at least one of them would be willing to stand up for Trump's interests here, but they did not. So previously, the courts ruled that the president is not immune from criminal investigations. Now that had to do with a sitting president. However, he's no longer a sitting president. And what we know is that the Manhattan District Attorney, Cyrus Vance, is very much interested in investigating Donald Trump's taxes for any potential fraud that he may have committed, fraud pertaining to the loans that he obtained, fraud when it comes to his own taxes. Trump previously said the Supreme Court lacked wisdom and courage because of its refusal to take up challenges to the election. That's the second decision that the court made here. He responded to Monday's order concerning his tax records with a statement referring to the continuing political persecution of President Donald J. Trump. So he thinks he's the real victim here. He also wrote this: the Supreme Court never should have let this fishing expedition happen, but they did. This is something which has never happened to a president before. It is all Democrat inspired in a totally Democrat location, New York City and state. Now remember, the reason why his tax returns are going to be investigated is because his own former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, testified under oath that Trump committed tax fraud, and he also committed fraud in order to obtain loans that he had no business obtaining. He would inflate his assets, allegedly, in order to obtain those loans, and then deflate his assets in order to skirt taxes that he should have been paying. So this is gonna be an interesting investigation. Just because Cyrus Vance will now be able to obtain his tax returns doesn't mean that the public will, although there have been portions of his tax returns leaked already to the press, and they've been reported by the New York Times. So Ryan, what do you make of all of this? I never get too excited over someone in a position of power or former person in a position of power really suffering the consequences of their criminality. But it might be a little different with Trump.
I mean, I think it's okay for people to allow themselves a little schadenfreude, to take a little bit of delight in the downfall of somebody they hate, or not necessarily the downfall, but in something so ironically going wrong for somebody. Trump heralds his judicial appointments, district, circuit, and Supreme Court as his great accomplishment. But you can tell that his heart's not in it. Like you can tell that he's excited about all of his court appointments because other Republicans are so excited about it. Like that was never something that he got fired up about. When he saw how excited people got about Gorsuch or about Kavanaugh or about Amy Coney Barrett, then then that would excite him because he loves being loved. And if you notice, and any time he was at a nadir of his presidency, he would do something about abortion because he knew the anti-abortion crowd absolutely loved him, and so he would throw them a bone to get them fired up about him, to kind of boost his own spirits. But you could always tell that his heart was never into it because he wasn't allowed to put onto the court his precise cronies. Michael Cohen, went to prison, not to the Supreme Court. But if it were a true, 100% dictatorship, Michael Cohen would be on the Supreme Court and would have just said, you know what? No, of course, get out of here. Not letting you have the boss's tax returns. And so there's still a semblance of checks and balances in place, and that drives Trump mad. And so, these picks that he put up are going to do exactly what the kind of right wing movement that put them there wants them to do, but they're not always going to do Trump's bidding. And we can recognize the former and also kind of delight in the latter for a second.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm delighting in it as much as humanly possible, and I have no shame in that. Like, I don't feel bad about that at all. In fact, the only bad feeling I have is just that feeling in the pit of my stomach about how people like Trump never really suffer consequences for their actions, right? So I'm afraid to allow myself to be too celebratory and then later get frustrated and disappointed when justice isn't actually carried out. But I do enjoy the fact that what you're saying appears to be right. I mean, our system of government certainly has some massive flaws. There's no question about that. But there does seem to be a system of checks and balances, as dysfunctional as it might be, in place. And we're not a true dictatorship. If Trump really wanted to be a dictator, he wouldn't be able to do it. And that gives me a little bit of peace. But obviously, there needs to be some pretty significant reforms at the same time. I think when it comes to Supreme Court justices, especially the types of Supreme Court justices who were successfully confirmed by Republican presidents, what tends to kind of bind them together, what they tend to agree on, is anything that allows them to rule in favor of a corporation and rule in favor of corporate interests over the best interests of workers and people, right? So I know when it comes to those types of issues, all three of them, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, they'll be in agreement. I mean, they've handed down some pretty vicious pro-corporate judgments in their careers. So I wouldn't be surprised about that. With this, though, let's talk a little bit about the election-related decision they made here, because they chose not to take up a case involving Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania, which decided to accept mail-in ballots up to 3 days after election day as a result of like the influx of mail-in voting that took place because of the pandemic. Republicans feel that this has been incredibly unfair. Now, if let's say all of those ballots that were accepted 3 days or up to 3 days after the election were thrown out, that would only affect about 10,000 ballots in the state of Pennsylvania. It would not overturn the results of the general election in that state. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter. The Supreme Court decided they're not going to take that case up, which is the second big blow to Donald Trump and his campaign. What do you make of that? I mean, do you think that there's any justification to that case? I mean, there's this concern that unelected state officials are making these decisions on their own, and it's really up to the state legislature to vote and decide on changing their election laws. What's your take on that?
Right. So what if people are concerned about whether or not the people making the decision are elected, they should know that judges in Pennsylvania are actually elected, as are election commissioners, as are the state Senate and the state House. So pretty much across the board, the people who made these decisions, who moved, the state legislature, the Republican state legislature that moved towards the mail voting, the Democratic governor who signed it, this bipartisan court, but Democratic controlled since 2017, court that approved it. We're all elected by voters over the years. Yes, there was some ambiguity about if your ballot is postmarked on election day, how much time are we going to give it to come into the election office before we say that we can't count it? And to me, you really ought to give as much leeway as possible. If you voted on election day, and because Trump decided to destroy the post office and it didn't get there till 6 days later, that you still legally cast that vote. Like that's what this country is about: is every person having the right to vote. But that's my take. Whatever. That was litigated in court through multiple different iterations through judges who happen to be elected. I don't think you have to have judges be elected to have them be legitimate, but in Pennsylvania they happen to be. And like you said, the whole thing is so absurd because if Trump won every single one of these votes, or Biden won every single one of these votes, and you toss them all out, Biden still wins Pennsylvania. Even if you flip Pennsylvania, Biden still wins. So it's like, what are we doing at this point? You might as well be litigating the 1932 election in the state of Pennsylvania, because it's going to have just as much influence on who's president right now. So the court was like, the court had eight to 800 different reasons to just say, you know what, this is absurd. This is not the thing that we're going to waste our political capital on.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat.
I got to do this. I got to do this because when it is more government, but it's also how the left has become the moral authoritarian. So let me start this segment by asking you guys a question. Which political party, pop quiz everybody, was trying to get content and music banned in the 90s? Which political faction?
The Republicans.
It was the Republicans.
Yeah.
I was born in '96, so I don't remember.
Oh yeah, it doesn't.
In the late 90s. I remember. So Magic the Gathering, for instance, we actually have this card downstairs called Unholy Strength. Magic the Gathering, of course, is a strategic card game with fantasy themes, and there's an image of a guy with a pentagram behind him, and it was conservative religious families who complained and forced the company to remove the image of the pentagram because it was satanic. Check out this story. Illinois lawmaker seeks ban of Grand Theft Auto game following rise in carjackings. And which political party does this Illinois lawmaker who is trying to ban a video game belong to? What would you guess?
Well, the party affiliation is not in the title, so
I know.
so the rule is Democrat.
That's the rule, yes.
That's the rule.
Yes, you're correct.
I think he's a statist. Is he a statist?
Yes.
I'll take that.
Sure. He's a Democrat. A Democrat is trying to get a video game ban. This is it. I'm sorry, everybody. First of all, when was the last Grand Theft Auto game made? 2013?
No, more recent than that.
No.
GTA 5, 2016?
Yeah.
No, I think you're
look
wrong.
it up.
Sure. Yeah, we gotta look it up.
But I remember seeing so many Republicans when one of the Grand Theft Autos had a scene with a working woman.
2013.
Is it really?
Yeah.
They ported it to PC later.
Yeah. Yeah, but I remember the outcry.
Wait. GTA 5 came out for PS3? Is that really the latest Grand Theft Auto?
Wow.
It's been a hot minute.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a hot minute.
So listen. You got a guy, a Democrat, trying to ban a video game that's going on like 8 years old because carjackings went up? I blame you, Ian.
I see the link.
Because you're the one who said
it doesn't make people want to carjack cars. It just makes it easier to do. That's what the
I think he
the
watched
evidence
the
points
video
to.
with Ian describing what he said and came to that
Yeah,
conclusion.
you see?
The one super chatter said like video game violence. I was like, do video games make people commit more violence? It was like, no, it doesn't make people want to do it. It just makes it easier to pull the trigger. They do it. That's why they train soldiers.
Exactly. Yeah, we talked to somebody about that. They say the military will use these.
The guy from the ranch.
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah. It doesn't make people more likely to. It makes it easier for those too. So that I understand.
Family Guy did a whole cutaway about that.
About video games?
Well, specifically Grand Theft Auto, where Peter loses his memory and he's like, "Oh, just here, play this game so you can remember how to drive," and then you see him carjacking. So it's silly money.
So this Illinois guy, Rep. Marcus Evans Jr., has introduced a bill that would amend a pre-existing law banning certain video games from being sold to minors. His amendment would ban the sale of games with subject matter including motor vehicle theft with a driver or passenger present. The amendment has yet to be voted on. There have been renewed debates around the ban after carjackings among young people have gone up recently. The bill would prohibit the sale of some of these games that promote the activities that we're suffering from in our communities. A 16-year-old was arrested in charge of carjacking on Monday. Days ago, there were two 15-year-olds arrested. I got to just say, I really don't think these kids are playing GTA and being like, dude, I got an idea. Let's go carjack for real. Yeah, that's so smart. And they high five and they just go outside and they're like, yo, give me your car. And that's
I don't know. We live in a generation of Tide Pods.
That's true.
Nobody was eating Tide Pods. That was not real.
Yeah.
But when it comes to intelligence, by and large, when it comes to our education system, we are failing. That's the bigger point I'm making here. And I think that's true. But also, most importantly, especially with this Grand Theft Auto thing, I believe it was Republicans that made it so you needed to show an ID card to show that you're old enough to buy certain video games just a few years ago. I remember there was such a massive outcry against GTA. There was one particular scene with a working woman that everyone was screaming about, and they actually came pretty close in banning the video game a couple years ago. So it's just absolutely absurd to still see this nonsensical argument being made right now, but it's the perfect representation of what government is. Absurd and stupid.
I don't know about that Republican ID thing. I just tried to Google it. I couldn't find it. But I do have the story where The Verge writes Trump and Republicans continue to blame video games for their failures on gun control. They say there's no evidence, but it's a talking point that has been repeated since Columbine.
Amazing.
Following two, we'll call them mass tragic events, they say lawmakers and government officials offers thought and prayers to take no action. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy told Fox and Friends that video games dehumanize individuals. In a speech today, President Trump pointed at video games specifically as the root cause of these events. We must stop the glorification of violence in our society, he said. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. Sounds like, Ian, when you said before that video games were leading to this, you were far right.
I would like to ask Julio about this because you're actually in the military. You're in the reserves. What branch of the military are you in?
Marine Corps.
And what do you think about violence in video games and how it associates?
I mean, I don't think that's true in the sense that that's the cause for it. I mean, you have to look at just the whole environment and obviously who the person is. I mean, I think in terms of desensitizing, maybe.
Yeah.
But in terms of it being the trigger behind it, no, I don't.
Or like encouraging it.
Encouraging it, yeah, because you separate the two. I mean,
it is an interesting point that Trump and Republicans were then bringing up, dehumanizing, essentially. Like we learned from it was the fellow from Fortitude. Is that what were you saying?
Yeah, Fortitude Branch.
Yeah.
He was saying the military. So I brought this up because there's this movie called The Men Who Stare at Goats.
Yeah.
And it was this like project where they tried doing psychic spies. It was a real thing apparently.
Yeah.
And in the movie you've got what's the guy's name? Is it Jeff Bridges, the actor? Is that his name? I don't know.
Right.
Which one?
But the actor in the movie Men Who Stare at Goats. They were talking about how he was in Vietnam, and this like Vietnamese woman runs out into a field, and all of the American soldiers, they don't shoot, and then he's like, "What are you doing? Start shooting!" And they shoot up to purposefully miss. And so the dude who was here said the way they combat that is using active targets, like they used to just do like a target. Now they do a shape like a person, and they do first-person video games, so that now it's in the people's minds of what a person looks like. So the general idea is that video games don't make people more violent, but a violent person this would help them essentially if they were going to commit an act. They would not be averse to shooting a person, right?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just have a hard time. I just have a hard time believing that's the main factor that's going to drive somebody. I mean, and you look at you just look at the history. I mean, you don't want to talk about. Be careful when you talk about mental illness, but Adam Lanza from the Newtown.
Right.
I mean, there's just so many other things. Although I think he did. I think he did play video games, though. I think.
Well, I think everybody plays video games.
Yeah.
Well, right.
They used to claim Dungeons and Dragons was going to make kids go crazy.
And
it's violence.
I mean, I will say, because like from the riots that I covered a lot. I mean, it was just back to back to back, and I found myself being very bored. And so I think there's an adrenaline aspect for certain high stress events, not necessarily school shootings, but I can see that because there was some stuff that would happen that I would see and report on, and it would be sad and be tragic, but I'd have a hard time finding emotion behind it just because I had seen it over and over and over personally.
So that would be the desensitization.
That'd be kind of the desensitization aspect, and so like I would recognize that it would like okay, like this is bad and this is sad, but it didn't have the same effect the very first.
Yeah, they do this to many police departments. They play very violent riot footage and officers getting hurt right before they go out. I've seen many reports of this before they go out cover many protests. Or a lot of them are jacked up. A lot of them are ready to prepare to defend themselves. And most protests usually don't get violent. They're becoming more and more violent. But again, psychologically, the video is such an important component in making people realize that there's something else bigger out there. It plays on the imagination, but it also plays on your visceral senses, where you get to see it and you get inundated in it in such a way where you believe you're actually in it. So video is one of the biggest forms of propaganda that we should be, of course, made aware of, and especially question when certain traumatic videos are being played over and over and over again, especially on mainstream media.
Dude, you were watching a movie yesterday or something, and it was like a guy just hitting another guy, just beating on his face.
Oh, Taken.
Taken
3.
Yet another violent movie. I mean, we're talking about
Super
much violence in the movie industry. It is punching, even all the Marvel movies, just punching and beating and throwing and blasting.
Listen. Everything, like 90, I'm just giving an exaggerated number, but the overwhelming majority of content is violence.
Guns.
Every Marvel movie. Every Marvel, these are some of the biggest movies ever made. Literally all of them violence.
The Mandalorian.
That was all violence.
Yeah. It was great.
Yeah. Game of Thrones, violence, war, video games, violence, conflict. The biggest games, like even Minecraft has violence in it to a certain degree.
Yeah, sure.
It's not the worst. I shouldn't rag on Minecraft. But you look at some of the biggest games, Fortnite, violence. I don't know if people are still playing Fortnite. Grand Theft Auto, the game where you drive around, run people over, and do crazy things. There is this component of video games that conflict is one of the big components of our entertainment. I wonder why that is. I'd love to talk to a psychologist or psychologist about this. What about violence is like such an entertaining value for us? Is it because it's conflict, it's risk, it's a threat, it scares you, and then you overcome it? What we've seen from this is there have been feminists who want to create what people call walking simulators, video games where it's like your mission is to go and hold hands with someone and earn points because they want to get away from that, but people don't like it. People like even if you go back to Mario, like the original Mario on NES, you play a dude who runs around punching bricks and stomping turtles and then kicking them.
It's like it's fast-paced geometric competition, kind of like throwing baseballs at each other like dodgeball, but it doesn't have to be shooting someone and killing them. It just is in the visage of that. So like I think why people like it is because it's fast-paced geometry.
Splatoon.
And you're learning how like what's that?
Splatoon.
What's Splatoon?
You were a bunch of like squid critter people and you sprayed paint on them.
Yeah, same fast-paced geometry. So that's what we're really learning is how to interact, hand-eye coordination. We're challenging each other to see who's got faster reflexes. But it's in the guise of a violent gun. You know, it's the AR. It's all these realistic guns. The graphics are getting so realistic that if you're in it like VR, you'll really maybe even start to believe you're killing someone. Like it's possible.
I got it. Right now, the big problem is not the Republicans for the most part. It's a Democrat who wants to ban these video games. The only thing we have to do to make sure that nobody comes and bans our video games is make all of the bad guys have Donald Trump's face.
Boom, done, nailed it.
There it is. Because think about it. Republicans might actually complain and say, I demand this game banned, but who's going to listen to the Republicans? They can't get anything done. They'll be like, I am upset about these games got to get banned. I'll say, get out of here. Just shut up. And then if you make all of the NPCs, any character that could die has Donald Trump's face, the left will be like, I see nothing wrong with this. All violent. You made the most gruesome and brutal violent video game like Doom was legit like super violent, but just make it Trump and they'll allow it. They'll stop complaining. They'll immediately come to the defense. Someone should make a mod for GTA where everyone's face is Donald Trump and show it to that Democrat and he'll go, you know what? I think this game is actually okay. I withdraw my bill.
I'm a huge video game nerd, as you probably know. If you don't know, I'm a huge video game nerd, Julio. I got really mixed feelings about video game violence. Like, I wasn't allowed to watch violent movies growing up.
Yeah, same here.
Because they didn't want to twist my mind. My parents, I saw Nightmare on Elm Street 2 when I was like 10, and I remember the veins getting sucked out of that guy, and it like stuck in my brain for years. Still to this day, I can see it. His skin turning white as his veins were getting. It was so just messed me up. And that was one thing that I saw as a kid. I was like, I wasn't allowed to watch Tom and Jerry or the Three Stooges or Married with Children. Like I was. And I'm aware, like, the violence, man, how it can brainwash you, but I don't want to ban it. I don't know.
It is interesting. I think, we do have to be careful about what kids are watching and are doing. But that's not incumbent upon government. It's the parents.
It's a family role thing.
We were just talking about, there's a video of Ron Paul that went viral, and it is one of the most glorious videos of Ron Paul ever. Luke was like, I've seen that video a million times.
Yeah.
I just retweeted it. I said, Ron Paul is a legend. It's basically a bunch of people who are like, ban drugs, say no. And Ron Paul's like, government shouldn't be the one deciding what you do with your life. But there's this really glorious moment where he's arguing with a guy, and he goes, you're not going to get morality from the government. The government can't make you a better person. Why don't they put you on a diet? You're a little overweight. And everyone's like, oh, and I was just like, yes, Ron Paul.
Snap.
He's right. If look, if you're like, the government should tell us what we can or can't do, it's like, okay, well, they should tell you to put down the fork. No, that's not the way it works. So when it comes to video games, when it comes to South Park, when it comes to Beavis and Butthead, whatever these shows are, because, Beavis and Butthead, believe it or not, is coming back, right? And parents have complained about it. It's your fault. I'm sick and tired of this. And is this really, for the most part, become endemic on the left? I mean, I know the right used to be about banning things. They're like, oh, these things are bad for kids, and, we got to ban this art. Now it's really the left. It's like, yo, the left are the ones coming out and saying, I should have no responsibility.
It is a cop-out, too. What you said about Adam Lanza was pretty enlightening. Like, I think it goes deeper into the psychoactive drug system and how it's making people crazy. And then
we're talking about parents taking responsibility for what their kids are consuming.
But like,
now
you can be inundated with violence, but if you're on psychotropics, that's going to be a different inundation.
And what I'm trying to bring up specifically and focus on is, you've got too many people in this country, whether it's people who have kids or somebody who just eats terrible food, who says, you should pay for my health care, even though I lay around eating double, Big Macs with extra sauce and don't exercise. Or this video game made someone crazy, so we should have the government take it away from everybody else. Or a crazy person with a gun, therefore no one should be allowed to have guns.
Right.
It's meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, and so that's why I'm adverse to when it comes to like video games, because it's the same line of argument when it comes to gun control. And one of the reasons why I became conservative was looking at the various gun control arguments made by Republicans and Democrats, and I was thinking, well, the Democrats one doesn't make any sense, and what else are they being misleading about? And so that's kind of how I went down the rabbit hole.
Right. And it's remarkable how if you're being logical and you hear the conservative argument on guns, you're going to hear something typically. They're going to say, the first memes I saw was, why is this gun banned and this gun not banned? And they're the same gun. So one meme is the Ruger 1022 I saw.
Yep.
There's a wooden stock Ruger 1022, and then there's a polymer stock with a pistol grip Ruger 1022. Literally the same gun, same capacity, same firing rate, everything. You just hold it a little bit different. One's under risk of being banned as an assault weapon, and one isn't. It's meaningless. So when I would actually go to, the left, the traditional liberal people, and say, why is this gun banned? They'd say, oh, assault weapons got to be banned. And I'm like, they're the same gun. It makes no sense. And you can't get a logical answer out of these people because they don't know what they're talking about. And so I'm just like, listen, if you can't be responsible for your own life, why should I have to pay the price? And that is a serious challenge. I am actually fairly left on a ton of policies. I totally believe in cooperative economics and systems of government. But there is a limit. We have to be liberty-oriented, not authority-oriented. And so what you have with these traditional liberals is they actually, I love this meme from leftists, they're like, Democrats are actually authoritarian right. And I'm like, yes, that's correct. That is absolutely true. The Democratic establishment are somewhat, they're not super far right, all at the top, but they are in the authoritarian right spectrum. They want to take away from you, they want to dictate what you do, and they are not overtly far left, but they're close to the left. So they're more authoritarian right. And there's a difference between libertarian right, where it's like, hey man, do your thing, be free and freely trade. Authoritarian right are crony Democrat, corporatist Democrats who have revolving door policies, prop up international corporations and big tech firms, empowering the corporations, and then also telling you what you can or can't do with your life. So I actually think the Democrats and Republicans, the Demoplicans, are fairly in the same place. You do have progressive Democrats who I think too much indulge in the woke cult stuff. And then you have a lot of good libertarian Republican candidates, like politicians, people like, well, Rand Paul, obviously, Ron Paul, he's retired now, Thomas Massey, and a few others. You have very few actual good principled Democrats at all, but I would say it's a tiny fraction that are actually on the libertarian spectrum. So I tell you, if you believe in freedom, I don't care if you're an anarcho-communist, far left, critical race, woke, whatever. if you're on the libertarian spectrum and your whole thing is, well, I disagree with you, but I don't believe in being violent and hurting others or forcing people to do things, I'll be like, we get along, man. Come over, have a beer. Let's grab a slice of pizza or vegan pizza, if that's what you're into. And then the laissez-faire capitalist can come and, and then sell us his great pizza, and we can all hang out together as long as we all agree not to oppress and beat and harm each other. But that's not what we're getting. We're getting tons of moral authoritarians who want to use the power of government because they think other people shouldn't do things, or they want to extract the value in labor from other people because they're not responsible for themselves. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel.
One of my favorite tweets early in the Trump administration, I think it was 2018. It was from this actress. I forgot who it was, but it was in Los Angeles, and she tweeted out that, oh, there's immigration checkpoints, and so she's tweeting to her followers, tell your gardeners, tell your housemaids, tell them to avoid this area. And everyone's just like, wait, why are you why are you automatically assuming that to tell their? But it's true because that is a majority of their staff, and so when they think about immigrants, it's the help.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just so patronizing, and it's just so fake, and I'm tired of it.
Yeah. So I just pulled up the article because I had to make sure I had it right.
Was it Kelly Clarkson?
Kelly Osbourne.
Okay.
She said, if you kick out Latinos, who's going to be cleaning your toilet? What? These people.
Again, they just see us as a political tool to hit Republicans with and to clean their toilets and cook their food.
I'm gonna read this quote. And I'm going to be very precise and annoying how I read this for political purposes because they're going to cut us out of context. Kelly Osbourne said, if you kick every Latino out of this country, then who is, and this is what Kelly Osbourne said, going to be cleaning your toilet? Donald Trump? You know what I mean? Osbourne said in an attempt to call out the Republican presidential candidate who faced massive backlash. No, that's not no, interrupted co-host Rosie Perez, continuing, there's more jobs than that in the country for Latinos, and Latinos are not the only people who clean toilets. And she immediately backtracked. I didn't mean it like that. Come on, I would never mean it like that. Dude, you totally meant it like that. And it was only when she got snapped back, she was like, oh, is that wrong? Am I not allowed to say that?
I thought we were all on the same page here.
Yeah.
This is it. Think about, it's not even about Latinos or Mexicans or people from Honduras. It is about cheap immigrant labor.
Yeah.
And it used to be, who was it? Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders warned about how the Koch brothers supported open immigration because it would work great for their big corporations.
Yeah, you get some dude who comes in working below minimum wage, no benefits because they're off the books, under the table, and then you basically have an underclass. Then Vox.com, the progressive website, wrote in 2016 the Democratic Party is becoming the party of the wealthy elites. So it's no surprise then the Democrats are the ones who are now saying, oh, we got to have more immigration and open borders. It's remarkable. Trump ran on the Republican ticket saying border security, no free trade. And it worked because regular Americans were like, yeah, I like this idea of, America first. The big business special interest corporations and the ultra wealthy were like, how am I going to hire ultra cheap labor with no rights if the Republican is doing this? All of a sudden, the Democrats were now like, yeah, open borders. Even though in 2008, 2010, you had Democrats who were like, we have to build a border security barrier.
That was the 2006, the Secure Fence Act. Joe Biden voted for that fence.
Oh. So you're calling Joe Biden a racist?
Oh, snap.
I think he called himself that.
Yeah,
but so even with all that, and that's why when they're saying, oh, President Trump's not building any new fence, just replacing the old one. Well, the one that was built in 2006 was basically just glorified chicken wire, and you can be easily cut into within minutes.
Right.
And so this new one that they're replacing, along with areas where there was no barrier, it takes hours. And the whole point is to slow them down and to actually get Border Patrol agents to that area so that they can.
The Trump party. And so you have 46% of the folks saying that they will follow Trump. I'm like, okay, there's the door. Y'all go do your thing. And we'll just pick up the pieces on this side and keep moving.
That was Michael Steele, the former head of the Republican National Committee, who's reacting to a new Suffolk University and USA Today poll that indicates that a pretty sizable percentage of Republican voters would literally leave the party to go join a third party that's led by Donald Trump. So according to that poll, 46% said that they would abandon the Republican Party, while only 27% of Republican voters said they wouldn't drop the GOP. The rest, though, are undecided. While 54% of those polled said that they were loyal to Trump, only 34% said that they were loyal to the party. So in regard to current Republican voters, they're far more loyal to Donald Trump and are willing to leave the Republican Party on Trump's behalf, than the number or percentage of Republicans who are unwilling to do that. It is the party of Trump, and Michael Steele thinks, okay, great. If they want to leave and go to a third party, that's fine. Have at it. But I don't know if he should be so confident. I mean,
no.
What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, he doesn't get it at all, man. And Anna, this is the same thing we see on the Democratic side. So back in 2013, I said Bernie Sanders could beat Hillary Clinton in 2016. Everybody thought I was the craziest guy that they'd ever heard of. Bernie Sanders isn't going to get more than 2% in 2016. And as it turned out, he almost beat her. Why? Because people don't like the establishment. And then I said Donald Trump has an excellent chance of beating Hillary Clinton. People are like, oh, you're crazy, Jake. Everybody loves establishment politicians like Hillary Clinton. Do you know Joe Biden only won by 43,000 votes in 3 swing states? Trump would be president.
Crazy.
43,000 votes, that's it. They almost put Trump back in charge of the whole country, okay? No, Michael Steele, you're not getting it. It's his party. You're a tiny, tiny minority in that party. But since they're all elitists, and since they're all so arrogant, they sit on Morning Joe panels and guffaw, like, oh, go ahead and leave. What difference does it make? You idiot. Your entire party's gonna leave. It already has left. So let me give you more numbers to absolutely positively prove it. And these guys are so in their own elitist bubbles, they can't even read a poll. They have a war on math. So the people that were polled, 85% of them said that they would vote for Trump in a general election again. These are Republican voters, 85%.
Amazing.
Oh, Michael Steele, enjoy your 15%. You're a joke. All of you are a joke in Washington, okay? And 76% of them said they'd vote for Trump over any other nominee in the primary, in the Republican primary. It's not like, we'll hold our nose and vote for Trump because he's our option. No, 3/4 of the party says, yes, give me more of that violence. I hate democracy. Give me more of that fascism. Give me more of those lies. I love it. I love it. I hate. Oh, I love it. Michael, that is who the Republican Party is. That's what. Remember, Michael Steele used to be the head of the Republican Party, the Republican National Committee, right? And he apologized for the Southern strategy. He was one of 2 former heads of the RNC that did it. What is the Southern strategy? It is to get racists in the South to vote for Republicans instead of Democrats. You built your party on racism. You should not be surprised that 3/4 of your party says, I love the racist guy. That's not the bug, it's the feature. Okay, to give you a sense of how much the Republican Party has lost its mind, 58% said that it was not Trump supporters who did the Capitol riot on January 6th. It was Antifa-inspired attacks. There is 0 evidence of that. No one from Antifa. First of all, Antifa is not even an organization, but okay, call it an organization. I don't care, okay? It was not Antifa. It was not Antifa inspired. No one from Antifa was there. It's just totally made up. Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Only 28% thought it was Trump supporters. No, the entire party has lost its mind, and they're filled to the rim with hate and fear. So that's it, guys. That is who the Republican Party is. The mainstream media will lie to you for another 4 years at least about how the country is center right. It's not true. And they'll lie to you and say that the Republican voters are wonderful, genteel people with different opinions and that they don't actually like Trump. When they keep screaming from the rooftops, we love Trump. And that's what they did in this poll again. So I guess I'm smarter than everybody on TV because I can just read. Like all I do is read.
So, Cenk, I actually want to read a quote from one of these Trump supporters who said this: "We feel like Republicans don't fight enough for us. And we all see Donald Trump fighting for us as hard as he can every single day." And that's from a small business owner from Milwaukee. So he's kind of explaining his logic and reasoning for wanting to leave the Republican Party if Trump were to start a third party and be the one who leads it. But I actually wanted to bring up something that I think can help inform why people feel the way that they feel, right? Because I mean, we know the details of what Trump actually did. We know about how he only used his position of power to enrich himself and also pass tax cuts for the rich. But remember, you used to do that segment, that Loser Donald segment. And I remember talking about the fact that he went bankrupt over and over and over again, thinking that maybe it will persuade people to realize that he's not this successful businessman that he's like really selling himself as. And there's an author, I was listening to an interview, and this author wrote a book where, she spent a lot of time with Trump supporters to kind of understand their thinking. And Cenk, we forget, I mean, it kind of shows you that we also are in our own little bubble. A lot of those people who support Trump went bankrupt themselves. So they see his 6 bankruptcies not as a failure, but as something that makes him human, something that makes him relatable, something that makes him more likable. So I mean, it's interesting to think about it in that context, because for us, it was more about trying to debunk this image that he built for himself that was, of course, built on complete lies. But a lot of his supporters know that he went bankrupt, and they actually like that about him because they see him as someone who was able to fail so many times and then rise back up and become the president of the United States. Like they have seen him as some sort of hero, and they see that as like a reflection of what can happen to them. Like, I'm going bankrupt, I'm going through these tough times, and look what Trump was able to do, and he's fighting along with us. That's the way that they see him.
No, so first of all, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I'm going to agree with it, just a shade of a difference. But first of all, just so we're clear, in case you guys don't know the reality, he's fighting just like you, and he went bankrupt 6 times, and then his dad gave him $413 million. Okay, so no, he's not just like you. But that actually goes to the point that Anna's making, and that I'm making. The establishment doesn't get it because people hate you so much that they would go to an obvious con man instead. And so they take those pretty little lies about how he's made it all by himself after his dad gave him $400 million and go, at least he's not a regular politician. They despise regular politicians. By the way, I will actually, this is now a stunning turn, right? But if you've watched the Young Turks, it's not at all stunning to you because I hate the establishment this much. And I'm right about it. I will give the Republican voters credit because at least they sniffed out that the politicians and the media are full of crap. They were right about that. You guys figure that out before Democratic voters did, okay? Unfortunately, you then took a massive turn you should not have taken, right? Then you went, oh, okay, they're full of crap. So the answer must be that the Democrats are eating babies and George Soros is a puppet master. And it was the black people and the brown people and the Jewish people and the Muslim people that were the problem. No, it's the donors. It's the donors. It's the corruption. You're right when you said drain the swamp. So what does that lead to? Right now, in that same poll, 8 out of 10 Republicans said that they are less likely to vote for a Republican who did not back Donald Trump in impeachment. So that's why he was acquitted again. That's why he controls the party. That's why people who voted against him will lose their primaries, because the ugliness of Donald Trump is partly the ugliness of the Republican voters. But they're so sick of regular politicians that they say, that guy who can't even read, at least he appears to not be fake, even though it's so ironic. Because look at the lie he sold him. 73% of Trump voters now think that Biden didn't actually win the election. He's a pathological liar, and they believed him over everyone else in the establishment, because that's how much they despise the establishment. And the establishment still doesn't get it, still thinks Hillary was a wonderful candidate. She could have won if it wasn't for the bats, the Russians, the flying saucers, and the rain. And Joe Biden crushed Trump, and we should nominate someone just like Trump, just like Joe Biden again. All of it is wrong. All of it is wrong. And if they don't learn, then not just someone like Trump will win in 2024. It might be Trump who wins in 2024. So that's how disastrous the state of the Republican Party and the country is.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support.
The backlash against Texas Senator Ted Cruz continues despite appearing in a goofy photo op to make it look like he actually cares about his own constituents, when in reality he doesn't. He got caught leaving the state during a brutal winter storm when his own constituents were dealing with rolling blackouts. He went on this Cancun vacation, got caught, and hurried back home and was greeted with all the backlash, including a mariachi band that showed up outside of his home over the weekend. By the way, this mariachi band was paid for by a GoFundMe page that was set up by a Texan named Adam Jama. The page also donated money to the Texas Children's Hospital, but this was what Senator Ted Cruz was dealing with over the weekend. Just a lot of fun. I gotta say, I forgot how much I missed going to the Hollywood Bowl for mariachi concerts, because they were a lot of fun. But anyway, the GoFundMe page said this: Senator Cruz, being an amazing dad, dropped off his family in Cancun in the middle of a major crisis and came back to Texas to continue serving his constituents. We want to thank Senator Cruz for his leadership and pay for an amazing mariachi band to perform for him. No one should go to Cancun and not listen to mariachi. So, I know how you feel about anyone showing up to anyone else's house or in front of someone's house in order to protest or do any of these types of stunts, Cenk. But we got to at least give the guys some points for creativity here. And I do feel bad for his daughters, because Cruz is clearly hiding behind his daughters, using his daughters as a shield for his own poor decision making. And I don't want them to deal with any kind of harassment or be scared or anything like that. But it is pretty funny. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, look, I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I just don't think you should go to anybody's house, period. But I guess if you're gonna go, mariachi band is the best way to go. And nobody's in the house. Ted Cruz is doing photo ops on Fox News. And the only one left in the house, of course, is Snowflake. And he could use the attention, because apparently they did not give Snowflake a safe space. So he's still in that freezing house. I don't know if Ted has bothered to turn on the heat, or if it's on in his particular house. Anyways, but when it comes to his kids, I know there's a story about how they're attending a private school, and the private school's worried that they're gonna come back and not quarantine. But it looks like at the end of the day, they're gonna decide to quarantine as they should, as something that applies to all the kids. And although I don't know why they can't do online learning,
virtual learning. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the school doesn't offer virtual learning when they're in session, like they're actually meeting in person. So why would they have virtual classes available? I don't know. But this fancy private school does have rules for students who have traveled at all during this pandemic, and that makes a lot of sense. They tied their own rules to the guidelines that have been put out by the CDC. But apparently, parents were really furious about everything that had transpired. Cruz's family's travel became so hot that administrators of the St. John's School parents' Facebook page closed down comments on Friday on a post that referred to this recent communication from the school regarding advisories, including CDC requirements for international travel. So just to tell you how long they're expecting students to quarantine if they have traveled, they must quarantine for 7 to 10 days upon their return, and they won't be able to learn online while in isolation, probably because they don't offer online classes or online learning during this time. Under CDC guidance, any international traveler who returns to the United States must quarantine or isolate for 7 to 10 days after returning to in-person instruction. And by the way, Cenk, like that makes sense. There's nothing controversial about what their guidelines are. They're trying to keep their students safe. For me, what really stood out with this story was just how much transparent disdain parents have for Senator Cruz specifically. Oftentimes when you read quotes like this in a story, they are anonymous individuals, they spoke on condition of anonymity. But no, these parents are like, oh, I'll tell you who I am, first and last name. So I want to give you a few examples. Laura Hollingsworth is one of these parents who says, at the end of the day, he's taking this heat for using his children as an excuse for taking a vacation, and that's a mistake. From a parent standpoint, all I'm asking is the school follow the CDC guidelines, and I need to say I have no reason to believe they won't, and they're gonna follow the guidelines, which is great. She continues to say, you've got someone out here saying, quote, I did this to be a good dad. No one's trying to dispute that. The question is, are you fully aware of the consequences of what you did? Does it make you a bad parent? No. Does it make you a bad senator? Maybe. And then Cenk, one more quote from a parent, Victoria Konar, who says this: you start with the fact that there are people ticked off by those who think they're the VIPs at the school, who don't want to be bothered to follow the rules because it infringes on their social life. Then you got people on top of that who don't like Ted Cruz. And then you have everyone irritated because they're freezing to death and can't breathe and can't eat, and he's going off to the Ritz-Carlton in Cancun and lying about it.
Yeah, can't bathe. So what I liked was the same thing that you enjoyed there, which is the universal disdain for Ted Cruz. It's not just progressives or people in politics. If you know Ted Cruz, you dislike him even more. In fact, one of his closest allies these days is Lindsey Graham. Back in 2016, he said, and remember, he's a Republican as well from South Carolina. He said, if you killed Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate and the trial was in the Senate, nobody would convict you. Well, it turns out actually Republican senators would never convict another Republican, no matter who they killed.
That's right.
So it turns out Lindsey Graham had no idea how prescient he was. He voted to not convict either, but in that case, it was Trump. All right, look, this story is largely symbolic. It is the wealthy that create the problems, that run off to the Ritz-Carlton in Cancun and blame others. So that's the main reason why people are focusing on Ted Cruz. The governors of Texas are far more culpable. The people who control the energy decisions in Texas, including the bizarrely Texas Railroad Commission, are far more responsible, and they almost all take money from those same energy companies to the tune of millions of dollars. So if you want to fix the problem and the corruption, don't let private industry and private individuals donate to politicians. It's super obvious. But last point here, in terms of the irony, the school has an understandable policy. You go outside the country, you come back, you got to quarantine for a week, right? But the reality is, we're literally the most dangerous nation on earth when it comes to COVID. We have the most cases and the most deaths. So if anyone's going to quarantine, it should be the Mexicans quarantining the Americans when we come in. Especially if you're Republicans, those are the most dangerous, most potentially diseased people on planet Earth, because they think that coronavirus, a lot of them don't think it's real, including Ted Cruz, who has minimized coronavirus all throughout, who often don't wear masks. I notice he wears a mask in Mexico because he'd like to be admitted into their country, but here he discourages people from wearing masks and doing any of the right scientific things. So if I was Mexico, I'd be super careful with letting a snake like Ted Cruz into their country. God knows what kind of diseases he could spread there. Oh, unfortunately, it looks like we're not sending our best to Mexico.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. I really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube members.
Whoa, slow down. They're bombing where? And who's leading? Fuchida, the Pearl Harbor guy? Wow. February 20th, 1942. It's been described as Britain's Gibraltar of the East, a mighty marine fortress that ties India with Australia. But whatever else it is, from this week, it's in Japanese hands. This week, Singapore falls. I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Germans brazenly sailed major ships up the English Channel. Other Germans were surrounded in the Soviet Union, and yet other Germans were making life miserable on Malta. But the big news was the Japanese invasion of Singapore Island, which continues this week. On the morning of the 15th, British Commander Arthur Parseval meets with his command. They have basically one day's supply of food, water, and ammunition. They all agree that no counterattack is possible. At 5:15 p.m., Japanese General Tomoyuki Yamashita receives Parseval at a Ford Motors factory in the west of the city. Yamashita demands surrender. Parseval asks to keep 1,000 armed men to maintain order, but Yamashita thinks he's just playing for time, so he demands a flat-out answer in English. Are they surrendering, yes or no? The surrender of Singapore is signed just after 6 p.m. In the whole Malayan campaign, the Japanese lost fewer than 10,000 men. The British and Imperial forces lost as many as 138,000, 80,000 of them prisoners of war. The casualty number, not the POW number, may be inflated in its count of the volunteer forces. The ratio of wounded to killed here is less than 2 to 1 and likely less than 1.5 to 1, whereas in the war in Europe, it had been up to 4 or even 5 to 1. This illustrates the brutal nature of the combat here and the prospects for the wounded. The Japanese have had total air superiority and were the only side that had tanks. They were also better trained and better led. They planned the Malayan campaign to take 100 days. It's taken 70. This is the greatest disaster so far in British military history. Well, it sure is, according to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. But you know, there is no official inquiry into the Malayan campaign and the fall of Singapore. There are a bunch of reasons for this, one being that defeat is not exactly uncommon for the British so far this war, and this also being at the other end of the world from London, and with Rommel's big advance in North Africa 2 weeks ago, it isn't exactly top priority to the average British citizen. Certainly not as high priority as the Blitz was. Or how about those Germans sailing 3 big old warships right up the channel last week, right? It's different for the Japanese. I mean, Singapore is that big pearl of a city not far across the water from Japan. Yamashita becomes known as the Tiger of Malaya, and this is a major victory. On the 17th, the European prisoners are marched off to a barracks, and the 55,000 Indian prisoners are kept separate. The Japanese will try to convince these men to join the INA, an Indian National Army that will, theoretically so far, work for Indian independence while cooperating with the Japanese. I suppose we'll see how that goes in future. As for the locals, summary executions put a quick end to any thoughts of looting. Public beheadings also help with restoring order, but Yamashita believes that the Chinese are enemies of Japan, so he orders the city combed for hostile Chinese. What exactly he orders to be done to them, and how much of what is done he is aware of, is not entirely clear. But the Japanese perform sukching, purification by elimination. Beginning now on the 18th, Chinese males are rounded up and screened. Any civil servants, teachers, communists, any who have a triad tattoo, or who speak with a Hainanese dialect, which the Japanese consider automatically communist, are no more. Finito. Exactly how they are eliminated is not so easy to determine because of a lack of survivors. This also happens to an extent in the whole Malayan Peninsula. Modern historians put the number eliminated at 50,000 in Singapore and 20,000 or so in other places. It's easy to blame Parzival for the whole Singapore debacle, but it isn't that fair. The first thing to be acknowledged is that no British Army commander in the war was so comprehensively let down by both the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force. Further, his superiors chained him to the mission of the defense of Singapore as a naval base and failed to provide adequate air power, yet dictated the dispersal of his forces to protect air bases. But he was still beaten, and beaten badly by an enemy he outnumbered in both men and equipment, and he had way better logistics. But he never managed to concentrate his force at major and decisive points. A lot of the leaders below him also completely failed in their missions. There was a wave of trying to blame the Indian and Australian troops themselves for the failures, but that's baloney. Heck, as several sources note, at least half the Japanese killed on the island were killed by Australians. One major sad but true factor is that once France and the Netherlands were taken by the Germans in 1940, Britain had no realistic hopes of stopping Japanese actions on the Asian parts of the British Empire. There is also the training and experience and the leadership of the Japanese, which was all way better than that of the defenders, and the fact that they used operational doctrines that suited the terrain. The British were road-bound. The Japanese used bicycles and horses to just go around them on the march south. But other than prestige, how much of a loss is it really to the British Empire? It seems straight from the get-go to be a bigger loss to someone else, China. Chiang Kai-shek's and the nationalist army's only remaining land link with the Allies is the Burma Road, and its defense rests very simply on the idea that the Japanese will be stopped before they can take Malaya and Burma. If the road should be closed, that spells real trouble for the Chinese. Something that could have been truly game-changing, but does not happen, has to do with a purple machine. Purple is one of the Japanese secret codes and has been cracked by the Allies. A British-built purple machine analog has been in Singapore since December, but what has happened to it remains unknown. Maybe it was destroyed, maybe just not recognized for what it was by the Japanese troops. But if it had been captured by the Japanese, if they knew that the Allies had not just cracked their codes, but had even rebuilt one of their cipher machines, what would that have done to Axis security in general? I mean, the British have cracked several Enigma codes, and that is like 100% because people get sloppy with security practices because they think their codes are impenetrable. A captured Allied-built purple machine would stop that pretty instantly. The implications of this disaster are not confined to the Asia-Pacific area. The single most important insight into Hitler's strategic thinking was delivered to the Allies by the dispatches of the Japanese ambassador in Berlin. An overall upgrade of Axis communications security methods might well have defeated or at least severely curbed the Allied success in this arena. Another unpleasant residual of such a disaster would have been to deliver a body blow to the willingness of American codebreakers to collaborate with their British counterparts. Well, that is all a what if. But what is also happening now is the Japanese are invading Sumatra. This equatorial island is some 1,600 kilometers long, and the capital, Palembang, is to the south. The oil fields that stretch north of the city produce around 40% of the oil of the Dutch East Indies, and that goes to 2 big refineries near the city. And oil is a big reason the Japanese went to war. The Allies have also successfully sabotaged the refineries at Borneo and the Celebes, so the invaders really need to take some local refining. There are 2 airfields near Palembang, and Allied planes have operated out from here since Singapore got too hot for them. They have around 85 planes at the fields, and a few hundred British and local men in terms of local defense. On the 14th, 150 Japanese planes, including transports with 240 paratroops and bombers to drop supplies for them, arrive on the scene, and after some chaotic dogfights, manage to land and take one of the refineries intact. The other is mainly destroyed. Later in the week, another big load of Japanese planes is sent out to bomb Darwin, Australia. The morning of the 19th, just before 10 a.m., the carriers Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu, with battleship support, raid Darwin with 188 planes, 5 more than the first attack wave at Pearl Harbor in December, but again led by Mitsuo Fushida. This attack is to support landings on Bali and Timor. Nearly half the town has evacuated, but there are some 50 ships at the harbor there. This wave, and a smaller second one around noon, sinks 7 merchant ships, an American destroyer with its crew of 91, 2 smaller naval ships, and destroy 17 combat planes. They do damage to around half the ships present, though, wreck a lot of the port infrastructure, and kill up to 250 people. This raid, the first air attack on Australia, together with the fall of Singapore, really looks like the prelude to invasion. So there is a big flight of people from Darwin. There is also panic in the city and a fair amount of looting. The landings at Bali had begun already at 2 a.m. Karel Dorman's Abda Naval Strike Force is hastily sent in to attack the Japanese ships in 3 waves, but the 4 destroyers defending the transports easily handle all 3 of the waves. Then, the night of the 19th, 14 transports and 3 destroyers with 4,600 men make landings on both the Dutch and the Portuguese parts of Timor. Portugal is neutral, though, and after some internal discussion, the Japanese have decided to offer to withdraw from the Portuguese territory once the Allies have been defeated there, providing that Portugal continues to maintain neutrality, which isn't considered very likely. But we've seen all war long what can happen to neutral or overpowered nations, and it happens even at the individual level. On the 14th, the SS Wiener Bruck is bombed and sunk by Japanese bombers while evacuating people, including many nurses and injured service personnel, from Singapore. Rescue boats with many survivors reached Bangka Island, and around 100 of those survivors meet at Ranji Beach. Once there, their senior nurse sends these civilian women and children to Montauk, a town on the island, while an officer of the boat goes to surrender the service people to the occupying Japanese. He returns with around 20 Japanese soldiers who first machine gun any of the men who can still walk after walking them away. The Japanese then come back and rape some of the women and then order all of the women to march into the sea and then machine gun them. Then they bayonet the wounded soldiers on stretchers. Now, one of the nurses, South African Vivian Bullwinkle, survives being shot in the diaphragm and lies in the water until the Japanese leave. She finds British Private Patrick Kingsley, who survives bayoneting, and Stoker Lloyd, who survives the men's machine gunning. They still decide to surrender to the Japanese because they will die otherwise. Kingsley does die, but Bullwinkle and Stoker become POWs. 22 nurses and 60 service or crewmen are massacred this day. There are transport planes other than those of the Japanese in the skies this week. On the 17th, 20 transport planes fly out the lead elements of the paratroopers of the Soviet 14th Parachute Brigade. 19 of the planes turn back when they can't find the drop zone, and the other one drops into the wrong spot. See, partisans have lit bonfires to show the way. But the Germans have also lit bonfires to confuse them. Still, by the end of the week, 6,988 paratroops have been dropped, hoping to help finish off the fight for Yukhnov and to link Pavel Belov's 1st Guards Cavalry and Mikhail Yefremov's 33rd Army within the German confines. On the 17th, Walter Model succeeds in surrounding the Soviet 29th Army west of Rzhev. The Soviet 39th presses in from the west to help free it, but it just becomes a slaughter for everyone. The German presence cannot be reduced. And here are some notes to end the week. On the 14th, the area bombing directive is issued to RAF Bomber Command. Attacks should now be focused on the morale of the enemy's civil population, and in particular of the industrial workers. They will be aiming at the flammable German residential districts now, instead of the actual factories, to try to destroy the workers' houses and not the means of production. The 19th, Maurice Gamelin, Paul Reynaud, and Léon Blum, a former French Army Chief of Staff, and 2 former French Prime Ministers, are put on trial in Vichy, France, charged with being responsible for the French defeat in the war. They managed to mostly shift the blame to the whole military establishment. The trial is never finished. That same day, American President Franklin Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066, creating military zones, which clears the way for the detention of Japanese, German, and Italian Americans if and when certain chunks of the U.S. are declared military zones, and the military commanders will decide which people must be removed from those zones and incarcerated. And that brings me to the end of the week, a week when Singapore falls and Sumatra, Bali, and Timor are invaded. And also a week when the Japanese bomb Australia and massacre a bunch of powerless prisoners. As for the former, it's not really Pearl Harbor Part 2, since Australia and Japan are actually at war with each other, but it is an attack that mainly does damage to civilian targets, unlike Pearl. And as for the latter, well, you know the saying, all's fair in love and war? Well, it's not true. Some things are just plain not fair and should not happen, even in war. We have an entire sub-series that comes out twice a month called The War Against Humanity, hosted by Spartacus Olson, which covers what it says it does, and you can check out the playlist for that right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Jonathan Garrity. Thanks to Jonathan and the Army, we can make all the great content that we make, so join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Yes, .com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.
When it comes to the topic of increasing the federal minimum wage, you have progressive senators like Bernie Sanders doing what he can to get it done through passage with a simple Senate majority. Then you have Republicans like House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who don't want any real economic relief to Americans at all. In fact, he was pretty blunt about that during a recent interview on CNBC. Let's take a look at what he thinks should be done.
I think the three things we need to do: back to work, back to school, back to health. So I would spend more money on COVID. I wouldn't reward states. What they're doing is they're reversing the order of how they provide resources to the states. Those that actually shut down get more money. California just came out with a $10 billion surplus, and they're going to get the biggest chunk of the money. But states with low unemployment that stayed open are actually going to be in a negative ability of receiving resources. So I would focus, and I would give incentives to open up schools. I would give incentives for COVID vaccines and others. I would give incentives that this country starts working again.
So that insufferable opinion, of course, is led with all sorts of misleading, statements, including the misleading statement regarding California getting more aid than other states. What he's referring to is the fact that, states like California did shut down businesses, which meant that more people had to deal with layoffs as a result of this pandemic. And so more money is gonna go to states to help relieve the economic anxiety that people are feeling as a result of their layoffs. Then you have states that stayed open and then suppressed coronavirus data, like Florida, to make it appear as though everything's been hunky-dory and that businesses should have been open all along. Meanwhile, 500,000 Americans are dead from this virus, and the number certainly did not need to be anywhere near as high if red states actually took the pandemic seriously. But there's Kevin McCarthy. He's not in the Senate, he's in the House, but it gives you a sense of the callous mentality that Republican lawmakers have. Then you go to Mitt Romney, who recently in an op-ed decided to trash some of the priorities that Biden has in his $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief plan. He says, a group of us proposed $618 billion as a compromise that matched President Biden's proposed health and vaccine funding, extended enhanced federal unemployment benefits, provided economic relief for those with the greatest need, and included nutrition funding, small business assistance, and resources to get children safely back to school. And I really want to reiterate something that I've been saying on this show. Everyone wants schools to reopen. But we live in a system where public schools are not all created equally, okay? We have public schools that are severely underfunded and do not have the resources to open safely. And then we have some public schools that are in better parts of the country that have better funding and might have an easier time opening safely. Right? These are nuanced issues that Republicans seem to want to have a one-size-fits-all policy for. But more importantly, at the end of the day, what they want more than anything is to get kids back in school so their parents can get back in work and that their stock portfolios don't further suffer from this coronavirus pandemic. They just want people to get back to work. That's all they really want at the end of the day. And before I get to Mitt Romney's proposal for the federal minimum wage hike, Nando, I want to know what you think. Am I being a little too harsh on Republicans here?
Short answer is no.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Not at all. Adequately harsh.
Okay, I like it. I like it. Well, then in that case, why don't we talk a little bit about what Romney and Senator Cotton are proposing, which I think is just so incredibly insulting. So Senators Tom Cotton and Mitt Romney unveiled their proposed legislation that would gradually raise the minimum wage to $10, not $15 an hour. Not immediately, but by 2025. 2025. So you don't get $15 an hour by 2024 as the Biden proposal stipulates. What they would do is cut that to $10 an hour, and it would phase in over the next 5 years. Because inflation apparently isn't a thing. for Republicans. I just find it hilarious when you have tremendously wealthy Republican senators telling us that we don't need a $15 an hour minimum wage hike, and that just too much money, too much money. Let's do $10 an hour over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I mean it's the Mitt Romney befuddles me so much because he is one of the most evil people on the planet. Like straight up, he's a purely brazen plutocrat who his history at Bain Capital is just one of destroying the livelihood of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans through his like vulture capitalism, which he basically invented. He invented that kind of industry. Okay. So whenever you see private equity destroying some company and firing millions of people, thank you to Mitt Romney for inventing that. And he positions himself because of his like anti-Trumpness every once in a while, even though he desperately begged him to be a Secretary of State. And there's that famous picture of Mitt Romney in getting caught in the restaurant, which always makes me laugh. He'll say something like, Mr. Trump, sir, have you no decency? And then everyone's like, oh my God, this man is a saint. And Mitt Romney is a disgusting ghoul, a cretin, like an absolute just disgusting brazen plutocrat. I don't know how to explain it, like how to put it any clearer. And this is just another example. It's like, oh, $15 minimum wage. We cannot give the poors that much money. This is not right. We need to give them $10 over the next 5 years. We're going to raise it a measly $2.75 an hour over 5 years. Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, no, it's again, it's so insulting, but they go further. Cotton and Romney go further because they're like, how can we tie this to something else that we really want? And their disdain for immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants, is clear in their proposal, because what they would also do through the passage of this federal minimum wage hike is ensure that all employers use the federal government's E-Verify program to screen out undocumented workers. So this is their way of trying to kill two birds with one stone. This is unlikely to pass, but the fact that they put this out there in order to pander to working people, at least make it appear as though they're concerned about working people, while simultaneously putting in these disgusting provisions that clearly target undocumented immigrants. I mean, it tells you everything you know, or everything you need to know, I should say, about their priorities. Their bill also authorizes states to share driver's license information with the federal E-Verify program, and approves $100 million in automatic annual funding to protect E-Verify from government shutdowns or funding delays. Because if the government shuts down and all those government workers lose out on valuable, necessary, critical income, that's okay. But we gotta make sure that we have safeguards in place so the E-Verify program continues to operate as needed, even during a government shutdown. That's who these people are.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many, Republicans. There's a group of Republicans who kind of understand that, broadly speaking, their agenda is tremendously unpopular. They skate by playing up culture issues, and they skate by mostly because the Democrats allow them to, because they're terrible. Like if the Democratic Party were like even halfway decent, they should destroy Republicans in every election. But because the Republicans understand that their agenda is so unpopular, there's a group of them that have tried these kind of heterodox positions, Cotton to some extent, Hawley, Rubio, all these guys have been talking to people who have been, convincing them to sort of pose in a different way vis-a-vis American workers. And it's just such an utter fraud. It's so obvious that it's a fraud. And I understand why certain people kind of want to at least take them seriously. I understand that we're stuck between two parties and the Democrats are terrible, and there has to be some sort of rupture at some point. But it's so transparently fraudulent what these people are doing, because whenever they're called out on their bluff, meaning like a broadly based economic populist policy that's actually on the table, they immediately go running and hiding, and it's just,
for sure.
It's just transparent.
Sure,
Just got to call them on their bluff every time. They'll never follow through.
And by the way, one other they included this. This is the thing that blows my mind, that they thought, no, this isn't cruel. This is totally fine. The Republican proposal maintains the sheltered workshop exemption. You're probably wondering what that is. That exempts employees with disabilities from the minimum wage, guys. The Democratic proposal would set the 14C wage, as it's known, equal to the federal minimum wage by 2026. There shouldn't be a difference in what disabled people get paid and what non-disabled people get paid. How are we even having a conversation about this? What is this? This is insane.
A level of cruelty and callousness that boggles the mind. I mean, it's what these people are. The people who run our country are just cruel, callous, maniacs. I mean, I don't know how to explain it any clearer. This is why QAnon is ridiculous, obviously, but the reason why it's been able to fester and sort of take root in American society is because we're led by these cretinous people. They're evil people, and people kind of understand that. People that would include this kind of provision in a bill like this. There's been studies done in the past when Republican voters or even Democratic voters and independents have been sat down and explained the Republican agenda to them, the actual Republican agenda. It happened a lot with the Paul Ryan budget, the famous Paul Ryan budgets, and voters refused to believe it. They were like, no, there's no way one of the two major political parties that govern us would actually adopt these positions. It's so cruel and inhumane that it's almost transcends the realm of belief for most voters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Republicans get away with that all the time. They propose policies that are so ridiculously cruel that when voters hear about it, they're like, that's impossible. There's no way a sane person would propose that, and they just flat out reject it. It's crazy.
But honestly, Democrats don't really campaign in a way that calls them out for these things. They don't.
Well, and they don't propose an alternative. Is the problem? Is they don't propose an alternative. The Republicans will stake out the sort of Attila the Hun position here on the far right, and then that'll set the tone for the rest of the conversation. But Democrats will be like, well, actually, what if we went to just 2 steps to the left of that, and they don't provide a clear distinction, and they don't provide a clear alternative, and they haven't delivered the goods in a long time, which is why voters don't trust them. That's the fundamental problem: is that voters don't believe Republicans and voters don't trust Democrats, and that's where we're stuck in our politics.
Well, Josh Hawley had his own proposal, which essentially is nothing more than tax cuts. Federal subsidies for people who aren't earning the minimum wage of $16.50, which is what he would want to implement. It's nonsense, it's garbage, and it would expire in 2024 when he plans to run for president. So just another, and by the way, he calls it the blue collar bonus. He's also a fraud, by the way. So, whatever you hear from these Republican lawmakers who are trying to pander to working people in this country, understand that at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is prevent the passage of legislation that should have passed already, guys. $15 an hour for federal minimum wage is something that should have passed years ago. And the fact that we're still having a ridiculous debate about it tells you even with all of these constituents for both Democrats and Republicans in favor of increasing the federal minimum wage, it tells you everything you need to know about how dysfunctional and how bought off our politicians really are.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.
Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton came under fire this week after left-leaning Salon published an article accusing him of falsifying his military record as he entered politics, first in his House seat campaign and later in his first race for the Senate several years ago. Here is the Salon headline. It says, Senator Tom Cotton campaigned on his experience as an Army Ranger, but he didn't have any. Now, a number of middle-of-the-road outlets have picked up on this story. They have validated the key facts upon which the Salon story is based, that is to say, the statements that he made himself about his service, and they've explored whether he did something wrong. Some conservative outlets have backed Tom Cotton because the Salon story makes a serious charge and in doing so evokes a claim of stolen valor. While possibly problematic for Senator Cotton, who is seen as a likely contender for president in 2024, stolen valor this is not. Cotton is a decorated combat veteran. He served in both the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He also served in the Old Guard at Arlington National Cemetery. He received a Bronze Star and the Combat Infantryman Badge, which is awarded to infantrymen who have engaged in direct combat with an enemy. He also received other honors. And he attended and graduated from Ranger School, which is no small feat. Cotton responded to this controversy on Monday.
Were you straightforward with voters about your military service? You're a decorated veteran, but there's a couple of stories popping up about you saying that you were an Army Ranger.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I graduated from the Ranger School. I wore the Ranger tab in combat with the 101st Airborne in Iraq. This is not about my military record. This is about my politics. Ranger Regiment legends like General Scotty Miller or General Craig Nixon have used the term to describe both alumni of the Ranger Regiment and graduates of the Ranger School, as did the Secretary of the Army, as did most of my buddies in the Army, as did most of the liberal media until a conservative veteran was using the term in that way. But if some people disagree, that's fine. I respect their views, but what's most important, I respect the service of all Rangers and indeed all soldiers who volunteered to serve our country.
When the Washington Post fact-checked this distinction after it came up in a Senate race separate from Cotton's last year, the United States Special Operations Command, under which the Rangers fall, explained it this way, quote, a graduate of the U.S. Army Ranger course is Ranger qualified, end quote. That would be Senator Cotton. Quote, anyone who is serving or has served within the 75th Ranger Regiment is a U.S. Army Ranger, end quote. That would not be Senator Cotton. The Army is clear on the distinction between being a Ranger and being Ranger qualified. Now, very few Americans are familiar with this fine print of the military lexicon because very few Americans serve in the armed forces and even fewer hold one of these titles. Even the civilian media struggles with this distinction. There are many examples of reporters using the term Ranger as shorthand for Ranger qualified service members, including at CNN. But military news services do not tend to lump them together. Senator Cotton, no doubt, knows the difference between these two things. Now, he is right that in the military, it is not unheard of that a service member might refer to a Ranger School graduate, or Ranger qualified folk, colloquially as Ranger, maybe in a greeting, maybe as a tip of the hat. But while it's a courtesy that some in the military might bestow on a Ranger qualified service member, it's not a courtesy that a Ranger qualified service member usually bestows on him or herself, which is what Senator Cotton did as he made his service record front and center in his election bids. So let's look at the facts here. In the lead up to Senator Cotton's 2012 House run and his 2014 Senate run, he repeatedly claimed that he was an Army Ranger.
I made tough decisions as an Army Ranger in Iraq. I'll make them again as your senator. So I did join the Army and become an infantry officer and an Army Ranger.
According to Salon, he also told the Hot Springs Sentinel Record in February 2012, quote, my experience as a U.S. Army Ranger in Iraq and Afghanistan and my experience in business will put me in very good condition. Now, Cotton's office, they don't dispute that he has referred to himself as an Army Ranger in the past. He is a graduate of Ranger School, which is a grueling 2-month course that can last even longer if a candidate repeats or recycles a phase of the school, which is very normal. And the goal of Ranger School is to equip service members to lead in combat situations. By the very end, they are severely sleep deprived and significantly thinner than they were when they entered the school. For 2 months, they operate on a delirium-inducing amount of sleep, little food, and extreme physical and mental exertion designed to find the best of the best. Salon's story described the course as a, quote, small unit tactical infantry course that literally anyone in the military is eligible to attend. Now, that's technically true, but being eligible to attend and actually graduating are two very different things. Ranger School is not summer camp. More than half of those who go to Ranger School fail to complete it, according to the Army. And Tom Cotton was one of the few who did. That made him, quote, Ranger qualified, able to wear a prestigious Ranger tab on his shoulder that he says he wore as an infantry officer in Iraq, where he served in the 101st Airborne, which is a storied unit that you may remember if you've ever seen Band of Brothers. But there is another path that service members can take after graduating Ranger School, and that is getting another assessment and joining an elite Ranger battalion. And this is where Cotton's claims about being a Ranger have gotten him into some trouble. The folks who serve in Ranger battalions are indisputably U.S. Army Rangers, and they can get bent out of shape if someone who did not serve in a Ranger regiment, like Cotton, refers to themselves as a Ranger, even if they have passed the school, like Democratic Congressman Jason Crow, who served as a Ranger in the 75th Ranger Regiment.
Brown, I'm deeply disturbed with the level of comfort that our nation is getting to with respect to truth and misinformation or disinformation from their elected officials. So I think it's really important that we let the truth be known, that the truth is still important in America and with respect to public servants. And in this instance, Senator Cotton exaggerated his service, and I thought that was important to point out. No, it's not stolen valor. I mean, stolen valor is a different thing. That's when people say that they received awards or commendations that they didn't receive. I think it's really important that I say that Senator Cotton's service is legitimate in its own right. I really wonder. I struggle with why he felt like he needed to, puff his service up and claim that he was a Ranger, because he's a combat veteran, is an infantry officer like I was, served in a storied unit. He didn't need to do this.
After the Salon story broke, Crow tweeted at Senator Cotton with a picture of himself saying, unless you wore one of these berets, you shouldn't be calling yourself a Ranger. Truth matters. Now, retired four-star General Tony Thomas, a former head of Special Operations Command and a legendary Ranger, criticized Crow. He tweeted at him, "You are a congressman now, act like it," and he called it a dumb debate. But here we are. This issue has been widely discussed, and it's important to nail down the facts here. And it's not the first time that this has become a political football. Most recently, in last year's New Hampshire Senate primary, both candidates, Corky Messner and General Don Bolduc, were Ranger qualified. But Messner's campaign described him as a Ranger.
As an Army captain and Ranger during the Cold War, he led men in our battle against socialism.
Now, Bolduc rebuked Messner, and Messner ended up clarifying to the Washington Post that he was not in a Ranger regiment, but he also defended himself, saying that there are different views on this issue within the military. And reflecting the nuance of this issue, the Washington Post gave Messner's claim 2 Pinocchios out of 4. Rangers are the premier infantry raiding force in the world. They are a strike force. Think sliding down ropes, dangling from helicopters in the middle of the night, kill and capture operations in search of high-value targets. Maybe the best pop culture reference here would be for Black Hawk Down. And perhaps you have seen the movie Platoon. That is infantry. Tom Cotton served as an infantry officer. Infantry are frontline combat units. So think day-to-day patrols in Baghdad, in Cotton's case, on the lookout for IEDs, suicide bombers, manning checkpoints, working with local police and soldiers. It is hard work. It is dangerous work. Which is all to say, why wasn't that enough for Senator Cotton when he spoke about his military service during his first campaigns for office? Senator Cotton, who has served this nation heroically, who has engaged in direct combat with the enemy, why did he knowingly run the risk of being called out for being less than fully accurate about his honorable service? Notably, Cotton's description of himself as an Army Ranger is one that he has stopped using the way that he did in his early elections. Even while he defended doing it in the past in his appearance on Fox Monday just days ago, he did not repeat his past claim that he's a Ranger. We've extended an invitation to Senator Cotton to come onto the program. He so far has passed on that, but again, he is welcome to join us. President Trump spending his final days in office much like he spent his entire presidency, spewing utter nonsense on Twitter, focusing entirely on himself, watching cable news, bullying Republicans, and trying to win at all costs. And he's doing it as hospitals overflow and Americans die by the thousands from the coronavirus. 1 year since he faced an impeachment trial for pressuring someone on a call for political purposes, the president called up election officials in Georgia, fellow Republicans, berating them, intimidating them, dangling carrots and wielding sticks as he demanded that they find votes to overturn the state's election results, as he asked them to commit fraud.
The people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
Carl Bernstein calls it far worse than Watergate. Democrats call it criminal, impeachable. Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn called it, quote, not a helpful call, so you know that it's super bad. It's 60 minutes worth of tape that historians say would make Richard Nixon blush or at least try to erase something. Objectively, an abuse of power. Anti-democratic with a little d, and as un-American as it is, a mountain of delusional, desperate, nonsensical BS. And in that 60 minutes, in 1 hour, nearly 120 Americans died of the coronavirus, and the president wasn't doing one damn thing about it. We're going to tick through the lowlights methodically and fact-check each one, starting with this.
If we could just go over some of the numbers, I think it's pretty clear that we won. We won very substantially, Georgia.
Now, Georgia counted the ballots 3 times, right? Once by hand, Trump lost. His former Attorney General Bill Barr affirming the loss, saying that there was no widespread fraud. Courts have confirmed that he lost. They rejected every challenge that would have changed the vote count. Trump's own election security team confirmed his loss. State election officials in multiple swing states, including Republicans, confirmed Trump lost.
We won very substantially, Georgia. You even see it by rally size, frankly. We'd be getting 25,000, 30,000 people a rally, and the competition would get less than 100 people.
Large rallies are a soothing balm for fragile egos, but they don't decide elections, especially during a pandemic. Joe Biden did not have large, crowded rallies because they kill people.
The other thing, dead people. So dead people voted. And I think the number is in the close to 5,000 people. And they went to obituaries. They went to all sorts of methods to come up with an accurate number. And a minimum is close to about 5,000 voters.
That's a lie. Raffensperger says they found 2 votes cast in the name of dead people in Georgia, nowhere close to 5,000. CNN looked into some of the campaign's claims, including one claim that a ballot was fraudulently cast in the name of a dead woman. We actually visited the home of that woman, and it turned out that she was very much alive, though she did share the name of another woman who had passed away. Right-wing media tried to run with a number of other false claims by the campaign. They made like that kid from The Sixth Sense and saw dead people everywhere. But it ended up like this for them.
We've got some good news tonight and an apology. One of the people who voted in last week's election isn't dead. Now, James Blaylock is still dead. We told you about him. But it was his wife who voted. She voted as Mrs. James Blaylock. It's old-fashioned, and we missed it.
Now, he later had to admit in a written statement that there were even more not dead voters than just that one.
We have at least 2 or 3, anywhere from 250 to 300,000 ballots were dropped mysteriously into the rolls.
Nope, there's no mystery here. Counties, populous ones, counting their votes normally, that's how they did it. And how counting works is the number increases as you do it. So it's not mysterious. It's counting. Even my 2.5-year-old understands this. Now, Trump also claimed that voters moved out of Georgia but cast ballots anyway.
Came back in and they voted.
And voted. Yeah.
No, that was a large number, though.
No, Georgia says it's investigated this conspiracy theory, and those voters left the state and moved back to Georgia, but years ago. This was not just before the election.
Do you think it's possible that they shredded ballots in Fulton County? Because that's what the rumor is. And also that Dominion took out machines. That Dominion is really moving fast to get rid of their machinery.
No, The software company is not doing anything shady. In fact, this is the conspiracy theory pushed by Rudy Giuliani and right-wing media that Dominion is threatening to sue over. Another point, the Trump administration's own election security squad has dismissed this, quote, "There is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised."
We think that if you check the signatures, a real check of the signatures going back in Fulton County, you'll find at least a couple of 100,000 of forged signatures of people with who have been forged.
Zero evidence for this. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation audited more than 15,000 signatures in one county, and they found zero fraud. Trump even goes on to complain that the one county the GBI audited wasn't a county his campaign complained about, except it was. Trump's lawyer actually interrupted him on the call to reveal that.
People should be happy to have an accurate count. We have other states that I believe will be flipping to us very shortly.
That's a lie. There is no indication that any states are flipping to him shortly. Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by 7 million in the popular vote and beat him in the battleground states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Arizona.
For some reason, they put it in 3 times each ballot, and I don't know why, but why? I don't know why 3 times. Why not 5 times, right?
That's a lie. There is no evidence of this, and Georgia says it did an audit proving that ballots were not scanned 3 times.
You have your never Trump or U.S. attorney there.
Now, the U.S. attorney in Atlanta is a Trump appointee. B.J. Pack is a longtime Republican who served in the Georgia House for the better part of the last decade. And when announcing his nomination in 2017, the White House said that he, quote, shares the president's vision for making America safe again.
Mr. President, the problem you have with social media, people can say anything.
No, this isn't social media. This is Trump media.
Trump media. So he believes the media outlets that tell him what he wants to hear and who repeat what he says as fact. It is, of course, circular reasoning. And remember that Trump's programs of choice have contracted recently, as even some Fox hosts have reported that Trump lost the election. So now he's super into One American News and Newsmax, and don't be confused by the use of news in their names, because they're really just propaganda outlets that play a game of telephone with the president.
I mean, and I didn't lose the state, Fred. People have been saying that it was the highest vote ever. There was no way. A lot of the political people said that there's no way they beat me, and they beat me.
Which political people? No reputable ones. No political people who aren't eyeing a White House run in 2024 and working hard to appease Trump's base.
And there's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated.
Unless by recalculated, you actually mean committed voter fraud by pulling almost 12,000 votes out of thin air, because then actually there is something very wrong, also very illegal about it.
Why don't you want to find this, Ryan? What's wrong with you? I heard your lawyer is very difficult, actually, but I'm sure you're a good lawyer. You have a nice last name.
Ryan's last name, by the way, is Germany. It's a fine last name, but it seems like he's stretching for a bit of a compliment after insulting the general counsel for Georgia's Secretary of State, maniacally swerving from insults and mafia-like intimidation to compliments and flattery. But it could be worse, I guess. Ryan's last name could be Putin. So this was a weird call, clearly, and it started with the president ranting for 10 straight minutes, only stopping when his chief of staff interrupted him.
So, Mr. President, if I might be able to jump in, and I'll give Brad a chance.
Given that chance, here is what the Secretary of State said.
Well, I've listened to what the president has just said. President Trump, we've had several lawsuits, and we've had to respond in court to the lawsuits and the contentions. We don't agree that you have one.
It's like that epic scene from the cult classic Billy Madison, where the principal swats down Billy's answer in the academic decathlon by saying, quote, "At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul. Except that was funny. Trump's call is just dangerous.
Exactly when did President Trump learn of the breach of the Capitol? And what specific actions did he take to bring the rioting to an end? And when did he take them? Please be as detailed as possible.
Mr. Van Veen. The House managers have given us absolutely no other onto that question. We're able to piece together a timeline, and it goes all the way back to December 31st, January 2nd. There is a lot of interaction between the authorities and getting folks to have security beforehand. On the day, we have a tweet at 2:38, so it was certainly some time before then. With the rush to bring this impeachment, there's been absolutely no investigation into that. And that's the problem with this entire proceeding. The House managers did zero investigation, and the American people deserve a lot better than coming in here with no evidence, hearsay on top of hearsay on top of reports that are of hearsay. Due process is required here, and that was denied.
Exactly when did the president learn of the breach at the Capitol, and what steps did he take to address the violence? Please be as detailed as possible.
Just wish to respond.
Mr. President, Senators, this attack was on live TV, on all major networks in real time. The president, as president, has access to intelligence information, including reports from inside the Capitol. He knew the violence that was underway. He knew the severity of the threats. And most importantly, he knew the Capitol Police were overwhelmingly outnumbered and in a fight for their lives against thousands of insurgents with weapons. We know he knew that. We know that he did not send any individuals. We did not hear any tweets. We did not hear him tell those individuals, stop. This is wrong. You must go back. We did not hear that. So what else did the president do? We are unclear. But we believe it was a dereliction of his duty. And that was because he was the one who had caused them to come to the Capitol, and they were doing what he asked them to do. So there was no need for him to stop them from what they were engaged in. But one of the things I would like to ask is we still have not heard and posed to you all the questions that were raised by Mr. Raskin, Manager Raskin, in his closing argument. Why did the President Trump not tell the protesters to stop as soon as he learned about it? Why did President Trump do nothing to stop the attack for 2 hours after the attack began? Why did President Trump do nothing to help protect the Capitol and law enforcement battling the insurgents? You saw the body cam of a Capitol police officer at 4:29, still fighting. 4:29 after, since what time? 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon? Why did he not condemn the violent insurrection on January 6th? Those are the questions that we have as well. And the reason this question keeps coming up is because the answer is nothing.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Utah.
I send a question to the desk.
The Senator from Utah, Mr. Romney, on behalf of himself and Senator Collins. It's a question, and clerk will read it. Oh, and I apologize. The question is for both sides, so the time will be evenly divided.
When President Trump sent the disparaging tweet at 2:24 p.m. regarding Vice President Pence, was he aware that Vice President had been removed from the Senate by the Secret Service for his safety?
The House Manager. And time will be evenly divided between. Of course, would the clerk read the question again?
When President Trump sent the disparaging tweet at 2:24 p.m. regarding Vice President Pence, was he aware that the Vice President had been removed from the Senate by the Secret Service for his safety?
The House of Representatives managers are recognized 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Well, let me tell you what he said at 2:24 p.m. He said Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution. The USA demands the truth. And you know by now what was all over the media. You couldn't turn on the television, couldn't turn on the radio, couldn't consume any media, or probably take any phone calls or anything else without hearing about this, and also hearing about the Vice President. And here's what Donald Trump had to know at that time, because the whole world knew it. All of us knew it. Live television had, by this point, shown that the insurgents were already inside the building and that they had weapons and that the police were outnumbered. And here are the facts that are not in dispute. Donald Trump had not taken any measures to send help to the overwhelmed Capitol Police. As president, at that point, when you see all this going on and the people around you are imploring you to do something, and your vice president is there, why wouldn't you do it? Donald Trump had not publicly condemned the attack, the attackers, or told them to stand down, despite multiple pleas to do so. And Donald Trump hadn't even acknowledged the attack. And after Wednesday's trial portion concluded, Senator Tuberville spoke to reporters and confirmed the call that he had with the president and did not dispute Manager Cicilline's description in any way that there was a call between he and the president around the time that Mike Pence was being ushered out of the chamber. And that was shortly after 2 p.m. And Senator Tuberville specifically said that he told the president, Mr. President, they just took the vice president out. I've got to go. And that was shortly after 2 p.m. There were still hours of chaos and carnage and mayhem. The vice president and his family were still in danger at that point. Our commander-in-chief did nothing.
Counsel for the former president.
The answer is no. At no point was the president informed the vice president was in any danger, because the House rushed through this impeachment in 7 days with no evidence There is nothing at all in the record on this point because the House failed to do even a minimum amount of due diligence. What the president did know is that there was a violent riot happening at the Capitol. That's why he repeatedly called via tweet and via video for the riots to stop, to be peaceful, to respect Capitol Police and law enforcement, and to commit no violence, and to go home. But to be clear, this is an article of impeachment for incitement. This is not an article of impeachment for anything else. It's a one count. They could have charged anything they wanted. They chose to charge incitement. So that the question, although answered directly no, it's not really relevant to the charges for the impeachment in this case. And I just wanted to clear up one more thing. Mr. Castro, in his first answer, may have spoke, but what he said was Mr. Trump had said, fight to the death. That's false. I'm hoping he misspoke. Thank you.
The defense counsel made a point about something that I read earlier. The defense counsel suggested I misspoke. And I just want to clarify for the record that the tweet I referenced, let me read you the tweet directly. If a Democrat presidential candidate had an election rigged and stolen with proof of such acts at a level never seen before, the Democrat senators would consider it an act of war and fight to the death. Mitch and the Republicans do nothing, just want to let it pass. No fight. So Donald Trump was equating what Democrats would do if their election was stolen. He said they'd fight to the death. Why do you think he sends that tweet? Because he's trying to say, hey, the other side would fight to the death, so you should fight to the death. I mean, do we read that any other way?
Mr. President.
The senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, on my behalf and on behalf of Senator Kramer, I send a question to the desk.
Senator Hawley, on behalf of himself and Senator Kramer, send a question for the council and House manager. And following our procedure, the first one to respond will be after it's read will be the counsel for the former president.
If the Senate's power to disqualify is not derivative of the power to remove a convicted president from office, could the Senate disqualify a sitting president but not remove him or her? If the Senate's power to disqualify is not derivative of the power to remove a convicted president from office, could the Senate disqualify a sitting president but not remove him or her?
President has 2.5 minutes.
No. But I can't let this rest. Mr. Castro attributed a statement the time before last that he was up here that Donald Trump had told his people to fight to the death. I'm not from here. I'm not like you guys. I was being very polite and given an opportunity to correct the record, and I thought that's exactly what he would do. But instead, what he did is he came up and illustrated the problem with the presentation of the House case. It's been smoke and mirrors, and worse, it's been dishonest. He came up and tried to cover when he got caught, as they were caught earlier today with all of the evidence, checking tweets, switching dates, everything they did. And bear in mind, I had 2 days to look at their evidence. And when I say 2 days, I mean they started putting in their evidence, so I started to be able to get looking at it. That is not the way this should be done, but what we discovered was he knew what he was doing. He knew that the president didn't say that to his people. What he said was, if it happened to the Dems, this is what they...
Senator Hawley on behalf of himself and Senator Kramer.
Attributed a statement the time before last that he was up here that Donald Trump had told his people to fight to the death. I'm not from here. I'm not like you guys. I was being very polite and given an opportunity to correct the record, and I thought that's exactly what he would do. But instead, what he did is he came up and illustrated the problem with the presentation of the House case. It's been smoke and mirrors, and worse, it's been dishonest. He came up and tried to cover when he got caught, as they were caught earlier today with all of the evidence, checking tweets, switching dates, everything they did. And bear in mind, I had 2 days to look at their evidence. And when I say 2 days, I mean they started putting in their evidence, so I started to be able to get looking at it. That is not the way this should be done, but what we discovered was he knew what he was doing. He knew that the president didn't say that to his people. What he said was, if it happened to the Dems, this is what they would do. In his speech that day, you know what he said? He said, if this happened to the Democrats, if the election was stolen from the Democrats, all hell would break loose. But, he said to his supporters, we are smarter, we are stronger, and we're going to do what they did all summer long. So what he did was he misrepresented a tweet to you to put forth the narrative that is wrong. It's wrong, it's dishonest, and the American people don't deserve this any longer. You must acquit.
Managers on the part of the House of Representatives have 2.5 minutes.
And that was profoundly inaccurate and irrelevant to what the question is. So I'm going to get back to the question. So under Article 2, Section 4, a president who is in office must be convicted before removal, and then must be removed before disqualification. Okay. But if the president is already out of office, then he can be separately disqualified, as this president is. But these powers have always been treated as separate, which is why I think there have been 8 people who've been convicted and removed, and just 3 of them disqualified. And as you know, there's a totally separate process within the Senate for doing this. The Constitution requires 2/3 vote for conviction, but for disqualification, it's a majority vote. It's a separate thing. So people could vote to convict and then vote not to disqualify. If they felt that the evidence demonstrated that the president was guilty of incitement to insurrection, they could vote to convict. But if they felt that they didn't want to exercise the further power established by the Constitution to disqualify, they wouldn't have to do that, and that could be something that's taken up separately by the Senate by majority vote. Now, some people think this trial is a contest of lawyers, or even worse, a competition between political parties. It's neither. It's a moment of truth for America. My late father, Marcus Raskin, once wrote, "Democracy needs a ground to stand upon, and that ground is the truth." America needs the truth about ex-President Trump's role in inciting the insurrection on January 6th because it threatened our government and it disrupted, it easily could have destroyed the peaceful transfer of power in the United States for the first time in 233 years. It was suggested yesterday by President Trump's counsel that this is really like a very bad accident or a natural disaster where lots of people get injured or killed and society is just out looking for someone to blame. And that's a natural and normal human reaction, according to the President's counsel, but he says it's totally unfair in this case. President Trump, according to Mr. Castor, is essentially an innocent bystander who got swept up in this catastrophe but did nothing wrong. In this assertion, Mr. Castor unerringly echoes his client, ex-President Trump, who declared after the insurrection that his conduct in the affair was totally appropriate. And therefore, we can only assume he could do and would do the exact same thing again, because he said his conduct was totally appropriate. So now the factual inquiry of the trial is squarely posed for us. The jurisdictional constitutional issue is gone. Whether you were persuaded by the president's constitutional analysis yesterday or not, the Senate voted to reject it. And so the Senate is now properly exercising its jurisdiction and sitting as a court of impeachment, conducting a trial on the facts. We are having a trial on the facts. The House says ex-President Donald Trump incited a violent insurrection against Congress and the Constitution and the people. The president's lawyers and the president say his conduct was totally appropriate, and he's essentially an innocent victim of circumstances, like the other innocent victims that we'll see getting caught up in all of the violence and chaos over the next several days. The evidence will be for you to see and hear and digest. The evidence will show you that ex-President Trump was no innocent bystander. The evidence will show that he clearly incited the January 6th insurrection. It will show that Donald Trump surrendered his role as commander-in-chief and became the inciter-in-chief of a dangerous insurrection. And this was, as one of our colleagues put it so cogently on January 6th itself, the greatest betrayal of the presidential oath in the history of the United States. The evidence will show you that he saw it coming and was not remotely surprised by the violence. And when the violence inexorably and inevitably came as predicted and overran this body and the House of Representatives with chaos, we will show you that he completely abdicated his duty as commander-in-chief to stop the violence and protect the
They did what? What about Egypt? Okay. November 2nd, 1940. Although Italian leader Benito Mussolini has said to his German ally that he has no designs on Greece until after taking Egypt, that is not the case, for this week, Italy invades Greece. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Adolf Hitler met with Vichy French and Spanish leaders to try and get them to join him in a coalition against Britain. It didn't work out how he wanted. Meanwhile, Italy was preparing to invade Greece, and as I said, that begins this week. Around 3 a.m. the morning of the 28th, the Italian ambassador to Greece issues an ultimatum. But it's basically a declaration of war, since the Italians are crossing the border from Albania before it even expires, and the Greco-Italian War begins. The Italians hope that Bulgaria will also attack Greece. Now, different sources claim that Hitler does not know, or likely does know, that this was coming. Martin Gilbert says Hitler gets the news on the train to Florence to meet Mussolini the night of the 27th. John Keegan says that Hitler likely knew since his meeting back on the 4th with Mussolini. Either way, Hitler is not happy, thinking this attack a strategic error, and that moving on Crete or Alexandria would have made more sense. Italian General Sebastiano Prasca leads 8 divisions in from Albania. They attack in 3 lines, the main one in center. Now, General Alexandros Papagos, Greek commander-in-chief, has not deployed near the border because he didn't want to provoke the Italians. He plans on using 8 divisions as well, but he's leaving 4 divisions in Thrace and eastern Macedonia in case the Bulgarians do also attack. His line of defense is from Lake Prespa and then along the river Tiamis to the coast. He does not have tanks or anti-tank guns, nor much in the way of modern aircraft. The weather the first few days is terrible, though, and denies the Italians any air support. This might not be the best time of the year for an attack. Italian troops advanced in a heavy downpour. They did not get far. It had already rained solidly for 2 days. Torrential streams and rivers washed away bridges, and the Greeks, well aware of the attack, which had been an open secret in Rome, blew up others. Unpaved roads became virtually impassable in the thick mud. The Battle of Pindus begins the 28th. Prasca doesn't think the Pindus Mountains will be a problem for his troops to cross, but that might not be the case. Still, the Iulia Division, some of the best Italian troops, cover 40 kilometers of mountainous ground and take Vovosa by the end of the week. Their goal is Metsovo. Greece's Pindus detachment under Colonel Konstantinos Davakis is deployed along the 30 or so kilometers that separate the Epirus and Macedonia sectors. They're the link, but Davakis is seriously wounded at the end of the week. Still, by that time, other than the Iulia Division, the Italians have not gotten very far. They do bomb Salonika, the 2nd, though. Here's a war story, also from the 2nd. Greek pilot Marinos Mitralexis runs out of ammunition in a dogfight, so he rams his plane into an Italian Savoia Marchetti SM-79 bomber, lands his own damaged fighter, and captures the bomber crew who have parachuted from their plane. That's pretty cool. Well, I said earlier that Hitler was heading to Florence to meet Mussolini. At that meeting, Hitler conceals any anger at not being told about the Italian plans beforehand, and says that German troops will be available if they need to keep Britain out of Greece and away from the Romanian oil fields. Greece is Britain's only continental ally at this point. Mussolini claims that if he didn't do this attack, then Britain would establish bases in Greece. But if this is the case, and really his purpose of the attack was to emulate Hitler and gain glory, but if this is the case, then it immediately backfires, for the British occupy Crete and Lemnos and begin to mine Greek coastal waters. On the 1st, a small British bomber force arrives to help the Greeks. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill will order more planes to go in over the next few days. In fact, half of the RAF strength from Egypt goes to Greece. Churchill feels it very necessary to act on the guarantees Britain has given to Greece. This should help public opinion in neutral places like Turkey or in the Balkans. Greece is careful, though, not to allow the British anything more than short-range facilities. Hitler does have concrete reasons to be upset. The British will be within bombing reach of those oil fields, Germany's main oil supply, if they get bases near Salonika. It also can maybe mess things up in the Balkans. Hitler's idea at the moment is that the region could be made satellite states by diplomacy. This Italian aggression could be a spanner in the works there. And this cannot help but provoke the USSR. And that is the last thing that Hitler wants to do, since he plans to ambush them next spring. And he's meeting Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov November 12th. So he's got to start thinking of contingency plans. I'll talk more about them in a couple of weeks. For now, I'll say this. He tells Fedor von Bock, his Poland Army Group commander, what will transpire in the East is still an open question. Circumstances may force us to step in to forestall any more dangerous developments. There are developments that may prove to involve danger this week to the south. At a meeting in Khartoum, the 29th, to discuss future African strategy, South African Prime Minister Jan Smuts thinks the British should keep the Italians guessing where and when they will attack, should prepare for rapid attacks, and should capture the port of Kismayu at the beginning of any offensive against Italian Somaliland. Douglas Dickinson, in charge of the East Africa Force, wants to split the South African forces he commands and only use them for defense. He doesn't quite realize how influential Smuts is with Churchill. Dickinson is also pretty unpopular in Nairobi. Well, long story short, or short story shorter, it is not entirely clear who made the actual decision to relieve him of his command, but Wavell delivered the news. His replacement in charge of the Commonwealth and British forces in East Africa is Lieutenant General Sir Alan Cunningham, brother of Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief of the British Mediterranean Fleet. Actually, General Francis Nosworthy was the original choice to be sent to Nairobi from Britain. Nosworthy needed to have a minor operation that would delay his departure, so Cunningham got the nod instead. There is fighting between British and Italian forces this week. The Italian sub Schiere is just off of Gibraltar. The plan is to attack the naval base there with manned torpedoes. Now, these are an Italian secret weapon. The maiale, the pig, has a little electric motor, and men in diving suits ride astride it, guiding it slowly and cumbersomely, hence the nickname, towards the target. Once there, the warhead of the torpedo can be detached and used as a limpet mine. The attack the 31st is a pretty daring plan, but it fails and it has a consequence. A faulty torpedo that is ditched is detected and recovered by the British. They take it for analysis, and it will become the master for future British manned torpedo designs. Britain is still being attacked by Italy at home as well. On October 29th, 15 Italian BR-20s with a strong fighter escort attack Ramsgate by day. This is in response to the bombing of several Italian cities. The planes are painted bright blue and pale green, which is not the best camouflage over Britain. And as for the German attacks on Britain, October 31st marks the last daylight raid by the Germans on Britain, and many people consequently call that date the end of the Battle of Britain. This means the end of trying to defeat Fighter Command to secure the skies over Britain, which is necessary before any invasion. The Blitz will continue, but with a change. See, in October, 6 times as many tons of bombs were dropped on Britain by night as were by day, and from now on the Blitz will be entirely by night. Germany has finally acknowledged that the losses are too great to continue the daytime attacks. In August and September, Britain's Fighter Command lost 832 fighters and the Luftwaffe 668, but Germany lost almost 600 bombers. And this is what really swung the balance. But Britain has many interests far from home to think about as well. On the 31st, British military intelligence reports a huge motorization program in the German army and a long-term and steady movement of troops from Western Europe to Poland. They say 70 German divisions are now in the east. What they do not know is whether these forces are going to be used for actions against the Soviet Union or in the Middle East. They're pretty certain, though, that they are going to be used for actions. I noticed, though, that this week American President Franklin Roosevelt, hot on the campaign trail before next week's election, is promising no action for the American people. I've said this before, but I shall say it again and again and again. Your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign wars. And so the week comes to an end. A week where a great new battle begins in Greece and a great old one ends over Britain. Plans are debated in Khartoum and an Italian secret weapon attacks at Gibraltar. The end of the Battle of Britain. I think I'll end today with 2 quotes from John Keegan about that. It had been a heroic episode. The few deserved their epitaph. Some 2,500 young pilots had alone been responsible for preserving Britain from invasion. The majority were citizens, but significant numbers were Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, and South Africans. A few were aliens, Irishmen and Americans, and a vital minority were refugees, Czechs and Poles. The latter, who formed 5% of the few, were responsible for 15% of the losses claimed to have been inflicted on the Luftwaffe. and this: the victory of the few was narrow. Had Hitler and Goering been privy to the extent of their success during the height of the battle, when a quarter of Fighter Command's pilots became casualties, they undoubtedly would have surpassed their effort. Had they done so, the Luftwaffe might then have made itself the first air force to achieve a decisive victory in combat as an independent strategic arm. As it was, the pragmatism of Dowding and his Fighter Command staff, the self-sacrifice of their pilots, and the innovation of radar inflicted on Nazi Germany its first defeat. True, it isn't the defeat of a land invasion. Nazi Germany is 100% successful so far in that respect, but Britain does live to fight another day. If you'd like to know more about Air Force development, you can check out a Between Two Wars episode about aviation that we did. That is right here at some point. Our patron of the week is Kelsey, who's a big fan of the show, and I am a big fan of hers because of her support. So do like Kelsey and join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. Subscribe, click the bell. See you next time. Oh yeah? Oh yeah? Yeah? Then who's dropping the bombs? Right. November 9th, 1940. Italy has invaded Greece, but already after just a few days, that invasion stalls. So what will Italy's German ally do? Adolf Hitler decides to come to the rescue. I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, Italy invaded Greece, and Germany made its last daylight bombing raid on Britain, though nighttime ones will continue. On November 3rd, though, there is no raid on London at all. This is the first time since September 7th. That's 57 straight days. An average of 165 planes each night, dropping 13,600 tons of high explosive bombs, as well as incendiaries, on major British cities, not just London. In those night attacks, with Britain's underdeveloped night defenses, the Luftwaffe lost just 75 planes, most by accidents. Still, on the 6th, a German Luftwaffe Enigma message is sent out with instructions that some of the machinery needed to equip the invasion barges in French and Belgian ports is to be put in storage. British signals intelligence picks this up, and by the evening, British High Command can now be 100% certain that German plans do not include an invasion of Britain, at least not for any foreseeable future. Remember, though, that the Battle of Britain is only using a small fraction of Germany's military resources. For the rest of them, a phony war is settling in, much like that in Britain and France last winter. The difference now is that the German soldiers suddenly have a ton more stuff from all of the conquered territory. Food and wines and silk stockings, and it's a good thing for Germany that it has some time now to replenish the tanks and planes and ammunition used in all the battles of the first year of the war. This winter, they're also doing an expansion program. The army is to grow from 5.7 million to 7.3 million men. And they're really going to need stuff like railway cars from France for Hitler's future plans. But what are they? Well, I've talked about this before. On the one hand, he wants to invade the USSR in May. On the other hand, he wants to consolidate in the West and invade Britain. On the other hand, Hitler had three hands. He's got a navy that wants to drive the British from Gibraltar, Suez, and the Mediterranean. But while Germany is expanding and replenishing, the British might be doing that too. See, on the 5th, Franklin Roosevelt wins an unprecedented third American presidential term over Wendell Willkie. His Democratic Party also keeps its majority in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Just 48 hours after winning re-election, Roosevelt talks with Arthur Purvis, the head of the British purchasing mission in Washington. They talk about what sort of arms and supplies the British will need to field an army of 55 divisions by mid-1942, such an army not being possible to equip without a lot of American aid. Roosevelt says his rule of thumb is to make munitions and arms available to Britain on a 50-50 basis. He even wants to build 300 merchant ships for Britain. Thing is, because of the Neutrality Acts, military commerce has been running on the cash and carry system, which I talked about last fall. But Britain's at war, and cash reserves, and even credit, aren't going to last indefinitely, and you can't do cash and carry with no cash. Roosevelt has the idea that the U.S. will pay to build the ships and then just rent them or loan them to Britain, thus circumventing cash and carry sales. This could also maybe be extended to cover things other than ships. It could replace all sorts of arms and munition purchases, lending or leasing them instead. Well, it's just an idea at the moment. I imagine we'll see if they follow up on it in the future. To get supplies, though, they would have to cross the Atlantic, and that's not a very safe place at the moment. Where, on the 5th, the Admiral Scheer, having reached the Atlantic through the Straits of Denmark 2 weeks ago, finds shipping convoy HX-84 37 ships strong. The convoy, at this part of its journey, has only a single armed merchant cruiser protecting it, the Jervis Bay. That ship is heavily outgunned, but its captain, Edward Fagan, engages the Scheer so the convoy can scatter. The Scheer does sink the Jervis Bay, but 32 of the convoy ships manage to escape. One of the most damaged ships, the San Demetrio, is set ablaze and abandoned by the crew. They re-sight their ship the next day, though, and board it, and with no navigational equipment, manage to get the ship and its oil to Britain. It becomes a media event. There's also action in the Mediterranean this week. Operation MB-8 begins this week. This is a complicated series of British naval operations and maneuvers. Operation Coat brings troops and AA guns to Malta, covered by ships from Force H out of Gibraltar. The aircraft carrier Ark Royal veers off from that to attack Cagliari in Operation Crack. 3 protected convoy operations, 2 going both directions between Malta and Alexandria, and 1 to reinforce Greece, are also part of MB-8. The main operation is Operation Judgment, though, which is